Hello friends, in this video we shall discuss the process of colonialization of India and its impact on the industry sector, particularly the handicraft sector, and basically we shall discuss the deindustrialization debate here. This is as per the choice-based credit syllabus of the undergraduate students in Odisha as well as in other states. Now, first of all, we shall discuss how the colonialism started in India. Now, if you look back in the history, we observe that the British connection with India started somewhere in 1600th century with the creation of a monopoly trading company called East India Company. And for the first 1.5 century, that means from 1600 to mid 1700, they operated, the East India Company operated as a business company. They focused on their business. They operated in the Indian coast, basically in Kolkata and Madras and Bombay. Basically, the present, if you look at the present cities, then these are Kolkata, Mumbai, and Chennai. But formerly, these are known as Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. Now, until the 18th century, the British maintained a very peaceful relationship with the Mughal Empire and they focused on their trade. But then by 1707, after the death of Aurangzeb, the Mughal control disintegrated. And the Mughal emperor became a token suzerain and provincial governors became the de facto rulers as Nawab of successor states. Basically, we see a fall in the Mughal Empire, and that's how the East India Company conquered the Mughal province of Bengal in 1757. And so that's you can say that the rule of East India Company starts from 1757, and so that the focus moves from trade to capturing the power, okay? And then they took over the provinces, other provinces like Madras and Bombay in 1803, and they also seized the Punjab state kingdom from the Sikhs in 1848. They also succeeded in driving their European commercial rivals like the French and Dutch from India. And then British government did not establish its own direct rule until after the Indian mutiny, which we call Sepoy mutiny, in 1857. And then the East India Company was dissolved. Okay, so basically, we can say that the British government starts ruling in India from 1857, formally after the Sepoy mutiny or the Indian mutiny. Now, the main objectives of the company were to enrich its officials and finance its exports from the tax revenue of the province instead of shipping bullion to India. That means when they were simply operating as East India Company and when they were exporting commodities from India, uh, and for the payment of those exports, the gold was basically coming from UK. Now they thought that if we can rule this country or the some kingdoms, then whatever tax revenues we get, we can use that for financing our exports, and we don't have to import the gold from UK. And the extension of the East India Company's territorial conquest changed its role from trading to governance. And then the company lost its trading monopoly in 1813 in India and in 1833 for China. And company policy was subjected to parliamentary surveillance in 1773, and the Nawab was replaced by the Governor General named Warren Hastings in direct charge of the administration. So Warren Hastings is posted in India as a Governor General, and then the direct charge of administration starts. But then Indian officials were appointed. Then Hastings was dismissed in 1782, and then Cornwallis comes in power from 1785, basically, which created the basis for the colonial India. And then all high-level posts were reserved for the British people, and then Indians were all excluded, and a civil administration was created, which was much more effective and cheaper than that of the Mughals. So basically, the British rule starts, and then British people did not use many officials. They used a very leaner or thinner administration, basically with a few officials. And so the top positions were held by the British people, but they also used some Indians at the lower positions. And so, if you see the numbers, how many British people are employed in India, then in 1805, around 31,000 British people were employed in India, and out of which 22,000 people were in army. British people were in army, and 2,000 people were in civil government. Now, if you see the same number in 1931, then the number had increased to 1,68,000 people, British people who were working in India, and then out of which 60,000 people were in the army and police, 4,000 people were in the civil government, and 60,000 people were employed in the private sector. So, but if you see the no, percentage of these British people as the total of the total population, then it was less than 0.05% of the total population. So, if you compare the rulers, Muslim rulers or the Mughals. Mughals had more officials, and the British had very few officials, and the reason could be that in some Mughal rulers, there are so many rulers in different parts of the country, and they had so many officials, but British had centralized administration, so that was the reason which why they had very few people serving in the administration of the British ruling in India. And so British people took over the tax system, which provided a land revenue equal to 15% of the national income. And but by the end of the colonial period, the land tax was very less. There was 1% of the national income. So the revenue, they started mobilizing revenue from different other sources, and the land revenue was not actually contributing that much, and the total tax burden was actually 6%. So that was the colonial rule in India, how the process starts, and then how they gradually expand their base in India. Then comes the fall in the main focus that we are going to discuss in this video is how the British rule impacted the Indian manufacturing sector, or how it impacted the industrial sector in India, or how it impacted the handicraft sector in India. If you look back, uh, in 1750, India had 24.5 percentage share in the world manufacturing output. So that was a very big number. Of course, China had again 32.8 percentage share, and then the developed countries had all the developed countries had 27 percentage, and the rest of the periphery, basically all the developing countries, had 15.7 percentage share. So we can say that no, India had quite a higher share in the world manufacturing output in 1750 when the Mughals were ruling, or you can say that the Mughal rule was coming to an end, and the British rule was about to start. And then we see that gradually the share declines. Of course, remember here that when we say India in 1750, it basically included the present India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. So, so in 750, India had 24.5% share, and by 1938, India's share in the world manufacturing output had fallen to only 2.4 percentage. So this is the no this is the Ford this is the Ford providing to the debate of deindustrialization. So this is basically the deindustrialization debate that people basically argue or the criticize that the British had severe impact on the Indian industry, and India British people did not protect our industries. Then we shall discuss what are the reasons why this industrialization started in India. Now, coming to so we can again we can discuss these numbers that at the beginning of the British rule in 1750, India had 24.5% share in the world manufacturing output, and by 1830, again that was we can say that the beginning of the British rule, that it had already fallen to 17.6 percentage, and after the British rule, it had fallen more dramatically from 17.6 percentage in 1830 to 2.4 percentage in 1938. So I have given you the source. You can, if you are interested, you can read those documents at the end of this presentation. I will give you all the references, and you can read for detailed information. Now, similarly, other people are providing other estimates, and you can see that the if you look at the growth of agriculture versus industry, this is basically an index of agriculture and industry, where the base year is 1871, that is basically 100. So what we see that during the Mughal period, the agricultural the industrial growth was very high, and that's we see a hill type of diagram trend for the industrial output. So from around 1600 to 1800, we see a rising trend in the industrial output, and then after 1800, we see a fall in the industrial output. So that basically shows the trend, and then we see that now gradually when the industrial output is falling, agriculture share is also increasing that time. So then basically we can look at the population or the people who are engaged in the industrial sector, because when we say that we had industrial capacity in during the Mughal period, we should know how many people are employed in manufacturing sector or in the handicraft sector, and then what happened to the people who are employed in the manufacturing sector, whether it increased or decreased. So in 1881, 20% of India's working population, or we can say nearly 20 million, or we can in Indian term, it is about 2 crore people were engaged in the industry. And by 1931, it declined to 1.3 to 1.5 crore. So if you see the population, then it is falling from the people who are employed in the industry, uh, that had declined from 2 crore in 1881 to 1.3 to 1.5 crore. So this is a huge fall. Because why this is very important to understand, because with the change in time, basically by after say 50 years, the population would have also gone up. So ideally, the people working in the industry sector should have gone up from 2 crore to more. But we see a reverse trend. So the people working in the industry, their number had fallen from 2 crore in 1881 to about 1.3 to 1.5 crore in 1931. So this is a huge decline. And so when the people are not getting job, or they are losing their job in the industry, they have this all move towards agriculture, and that's how we see the people who are employed in agriculture had that number had gone up from 7.1 crore to about 10 crore. So this is huge increase in the employment in the agriculture, because industries were affected. Now, Tirthankar, who is a major researcher, who is a prominent figure in the field of Indian economic history, says that women were affected the most. And since census data are not available before, systematic data are not available because of the occupation classifications, we see that in 1911 census, about 34.3 percentage people, women were employed in the industry, and that had fallen to 29.7 percentage. So, share of women workers in the industrial employment had fallen from 34 to 29.7 percentage between 1911 and 1931. So, if you compare the past, for which systematic data are not available, so probably the number would be even much higher, or the fall in the employment of women in the industry would be much higher. Now, what are the major industries or the handicrafts that India had before the British started ruling in India, and how that were impacted? So, the major handicrafts that India had were spinning and weaving, then woolen carpets, then engraved brassware, and then shawls, and manufacture of leather goods, in a range of metal work, and then carpet and rugs, wood, stone, glass, chemicals, hides and skins, food, drink, tobacco. So we had different varieties of handicrafts and small industries in India, and we were exporting quite a lot of these industrial products to many other countries. And but we see that during the British rule, all these industries were affected very badly for different reasons. Now, what are the reasons? The key reasons behind this deindustrialization are as follows. So we can give five important reasons. One is the technological obsolescence. And so why, we said the technology were obsolete? Because by the time, by the time British were ruling in India, there was already industrial revolution in the United Kingdom and in other parts of the world, and we see that the hand tools had to compete with the machines, and basically India lost. So we can say that India could not take advantage of the industrial revolution that happened in the United Kingdom and other parts of the world, and that's how India lost the competition, basically the technological competition. So that is one of the reasons that the handicrafts sector was badly affected. And second, Britain basically promoted the free trade as an engine of growth. Basically, when British did not have the industrial revolution, it had protected its own industry from the foreign competition. But when they got the advantage in basically industrialization, they started promoting free trade. In fact, a lot of economists and yeah, like J.S. Mill and many other economists, they tried to experiment their theories in Indian subcontinent, and so basically they started promoting free trade, and so India was badly affected by the free trade. Indian industries were not protected, and so that's how that is another reason behind the deindustrialization in India. And then there is also an argument that the globalization process or the free trade did have some positive impact, but overall the impact was negative. Why? What is this argument? So basically, we say that the creative role of globalization. That means when we say creative role of the globalization, that means globalization imposes a competition on the existing players. And now, since British were ruling here, they also brought some technology, and in fact, some of the producers got some technology from other parts of the world, including England, and we shall discuss that. But we see that uh, that the that although we got technology, but the destructive role of the industrialization of the globalization was much more severe. And so the again, although we got the modern technology, and we we could not really benefit so much. Rather, so many industries were shut down, and handicrafts industries are badly affected. They could not compete with the uh, uh, machine produced output. So that is the third reason behind the deindustrialization. Then modern industry could not grow in India. That happened because it was implanted rather than it emerged as an extension or evolution of the traditional industry. See, whenever any industrialization happens, if that evolves automatically, then that will sustain because people would be knowing things how to compete, and then that has come out of their own interest. But the modern industrialization that happened in India, that vessel came from UK, that we can say that it was implanted in India, and it was not an extension or evolution out of the traditional industry. That's how the modern industry could not prosper fast. And then we can also say that there was a drastic change in the domestic demand after the rule of the Mughals. And basically, when the British came, there was a significant change in the domestic demand because when the Mughals were ruling, the clothes that they were wearing and the war goods, basically the swords and the brass wire materials, different other metals which were used by the kings, basically luxurious items, were not used by the British rulers. So that's how, and in fact, it also so happened that the Indians started imitating the British people, and that's how it also had significant impact on the change in the domestic demand. So all these factors actually had impact on the industry in India, and that's how it leads to the deindustrialization. And so, if you discuss the process of the deindustrialization, then Mughal in India had a bigger industry than any other country, and a large part of the industries were destroyed as a consequence of the British rule. And the damage to India's main industry was greatly reinforced in the 19th century by duty-free imports of the British cotton textiles. And then, as is told earlier, the new rulers over European clothes, shoes, and then drank imported beer, and then wines and spirits, and used European weapons. And so their tastes were also mimicked by the male members of the new Indian middle class, who acted as their clerks and intermediaries. And as a result of these political and social changes, about three-quarters of the domestic demand for luxury handicrafts was destroyed. This was a shattering blow to the manufacturing of fine muslins, jewelry, luxury clothing, and footwear, decorative swords, and weapons. And home market for these goods was about 5% of the Mughal national income, and export market for textile probably was another 1.5 percentage. So these were all badly affected. And then we also see that the second blow basically came from the massive import of the cheap textiles from England after the Napoleonic Wars. And so that's how the home spinning, which is part-time activity of the village women, was greatly affected. And so the demand for the village handloom weaving changed with a substantial switching to using factory instead of home spun yarn. And then the modern cotton mills were started in Bombay somewhere in 1851. Of course, that preceded Japan by 20 years and China by 40 years. So this has positive impact of the British rule or say, the globalization process. So the cotton mills came to India to basically Bombay in 1851, which happens much before Japan and China by 20 and 30 years respectively. But still, it did not have positive impact, and the production was concentrated on coarse yarn, which were sold domestically and to China and Japan. And exports were basically half of the output. India began to suffer from Japanese competition, in the 1890s. So because by the time again British government which was ruling, the British Raj which was ruling in India, they started promoting free trade, and they did not protect the Indian industry, which they did for their industry in the early phase of the industrialization. So India had to face the Japanese competition in 1890s, and exports to Japan were practically eliminated by 1898. And so shortly after that, Japanese factories in China began to reduce India's market there. And by the end of 1930s, India's export of yarn to China and Japan had almost disappeared. And see, before the British rule, India used to export quite a lot of yarn and many other commodities to China and Japan. But we see that by 1930, all these have disappeared, and because many of the Indian industries could not compete, and because when the industries are in infant stage, the British government did not protect those industries, and that's how they had to face stiff competition from China and Japan, and that's how we lost the share in the international market. And so India had to import both yarn and piece goods from China and Japan. And so if the British had been willing to give tariff protection, India could have copied Lancashire textile technology more quickly. But instead, British imports entered India duty free. So basically, British people did not protect the Indian industry, and that's how they had to basically stiff competition, and that's how they could not compete. Which, in fact, I told that the British had protected their own industry, but anywhere in the world, wherever your industries are in the infancy stage, you have to protect it, otherwise they can't compete. And by 1920s, when Indian textile imports were coming mainly from Japan, British policy changed, and by 1934, the tariff on cotton cloth had been raised to 50% with a margin of preference for British products. So that's how. So they gave a preference to the British products with a lower tariff or absolutely no tariff. That's how British products flooded the Indian market, and that's how Indian industries are badly affected. And as a result, there was a considerable substitution of the local textiles for the imported products. And in in 1896, Indian mills supplied only 8% of Indian cloth consumption. That is a very bad situation. So that means basically imported products which became cheaper, and so that's how Indian industry could not compete with them, and that's how whatever cloth was consumed in India, only 8% was produced by the Indian mills, and rest came from England. And in 1930, 20%. So that number basically increases to 20 percentage. Basically, India's production basically increases, uh, which basically was 8 percentage in 1896. It increased to 20 percentage in 1913, and 76 percentage in 1945. And we shall discuss why this happened, because of the Swadeshi movement that had happened. So the production started in India. So by the later date, there were no imports of piece goods. So we can see that then similarly we had modern jute manufacturing in 1854, and the industry expanded rapidly in the vicinity of Calcutta, and it was largely in the hand of foreigners. So industries although started in India, those were not owned by the Indians; these were owned by the foreigners, and between 1879 and 1913, the number of jute spindles rose tenfold, much faster than the growth of the cotton textiles. Of course, most of the jute output was for export. And during that time, also, we observed the coal mining, mainly in Bengal, was another industry which achieved significance, and its output, actually, which had reached up to 15.7 million tons in 1914, largely met the demands of the Indian Railway. And we also see that by 1911, the first Indian steel mill was built by the Tata Company at Jamshedpur in Bihar. And then Indian industry started 15 years later than in China, where first mill was built at Hangyang in 1896. Of course, China had the first steel mill, but India also had a steel mill in 1911. During that British time, it is Tata Company uh, it started the production in Jamshedpur. And then starts in early 20th century the Swadeshi movement starts. And so the Indian firms in industry, insurance and banking were given a boost during this movement, basically from 1905 onwards. And because the nationalist movement boycotted the British goods, and so that basically favored the Indian enterprise. And during the First World War also, the British supply to India was affected, and that also helped the Indian firms on the home market for textiles and steel. And after the war, under nationalist pressure, the government started to favor Indian enterprise in its purchase of stores, and it agreed to create a tariff commission in 1921, which started raising tariff for protective reasons. So these are basically they are the processes through which the deindustrialization started happened in India. And and to recap our discussion on the deindustrialization or the effect of the British rule in India, basically on the handicraft sector, we observed that before the British came, India exported quite a lot of goods to different countries, and then we had a high share in the world manufacturing output. And basically we had 24.5% share in the world manufacturing output, that had fallen to 2.4 percentage in 1938. Similarly, if you look at the population engaged in the industry, that had fallen from 2 crore in 1881 to about 1.3 crore or 1.5 crore in 1931. Similarly, the share of women who worked in industry had fallen from 34.3 percentage in 1911 to 29.7 percentage in 1931. And during this time, we also observed that and the people now moved from industry or from handicrafts to the agriculture, and that's how the people who worked in agriculture, their number increased from 7.1 crore in 1881 to 10 crore in 1931. So that's how the ruralization process starts. People have people started moving from industry to agriculture, and the reasons we discuss that one is the technological obsolescence, and then the free trade. So without any tax, the British commodities started coming to India. Then India had to face free trade with China, Japan, and then although we got some benefits, like we got the new technology, so the new steel mill can have again, or the new textile mill came to India, the modern industry came to India, but we had to close so many handicraft industries and textile industries. So the overall there was a loss to the Indian handicraft sector. And similarly, the modern industry was not an evolution from the traditional industry, rather this was implanted. So that's how we could not see the growth. And similarly, there was also a significant change in the domestic demand after the rule of the Mughals. And that's how overall there was the process of deindustrialization. So this is all about the effect of the British rule on the India's handicraft sector and the process of ruralization. So these are the references. If somebody is interested, can go through all these references. These are very good references. Everybody should read. I would recommend everyone to go through the book of Tirthankar Rai, and somebody, if somebody is interested, can also read it. Must read, I think, for all the people who are interested to know the impact of the British rule on India, basically the drainage theory, know how much resources were drained from India to the British. Everyone should read Dadabhai Naroji's book written in 1911. It gives a very systematic account of uh, the resources, how these were drained from India to the British, and how Indian people lived in poverty, and that they had to suffer from famines and then from different epidemics, and how the British people were viewed spectators. So, similarly, yeah, these are the other references. I have used the data from the OECD book of World Economy. This is very good book for the data, basically the historical data. So in this way, we conclude the discussion on the effect of the British rule on the India's handicraft sector and process of ruralization. Thank you for watching this video. Now, if you are interested to get more videos regularly, do subscribe my channel. So here is the link to my channel. Thank you very much for watching this.